Hello and welcome to the Keto Man's Club podcast.
We're glad you're here, where each week we talk about men's health and lifestyle.
We do so with the foundation of the ketogenic diet and lifestyle.
If you don't know what keto is, stick around and you'll find out.
The podcast will bring you real, honest fun.
Each week we strive to uncover the tips and tricks that you can use in your everyday life to maximize your overall health.
Find the clearest path to becoming the best version of yourself that you were meant to be.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Keto Man's Club podcast. My name is Chris. I'm one of your hosts and I'm joined today by Jim and Alberto as always. How's it going, Jim?
It's good. I will admit that I have slathered myself, I think is the right verb, with a little bit of calamine lotion.
Mm-hmm.
I did some weeding over the weekend and So it's the itching that you can at least talk about in social circles. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So all is good, man. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing pretty good. I just got back from a little bit of a bike ride. I got my bike worked on a couple weeks ago, and I've been slowly but surely getting at least a little bit of a ride in every couple of days at least, and really enjoying it. It's kind of one of those things that I kind of can give myself the justification to get a drink if I ride my bike to Quick Trip and then, a mile and a half away and get the drink and then ride back. So I just got back from that and trying out a couple different routes to and from, trying to increase the mileage without making it too terribly hard on myself or going too terribly far out of the way. And so hit about 30 minutes this one. So that's not bad at all. Yeah. Alberto, what's new?
I decided I'm going to ride out this maintenance on this cut one more week because I wasn't able to train all last week with my tooth getting yanked out of my head. So I didn't train yesterday. I didn't train today. It was funny, like the spot itself where they pulled the wisdom tooth wasn't bothering me at all. But like at night, like I feel like I got punched, which makes perfect sense if you think about it. And so it was just bugging me. And the idea of like inertia and lifting just doesn't seem real appealing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But ironically today, as I was driving home, like you're kind of afraid to yawn because it hurts. So like you yawn, but you kind of stifle it at the same time. So I yawned and held my mouth in the same spot and my jaw cracked and it hasn't hurt since. So I think maybe that's what it needed. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe.
A little chiropractic jaw action through a yawn. Other than that, finally decided to get over my hatred of doctors. Had a doctor appointment today.
Yeah.
New clinic, new general practitioner. Wasn't crazy about it, but time to get it done. So it's why I kind of walk in there and, you got to be all messed up and whatnot. And so I check myself in and, they got a TV playing and I'm just thinking, most of the time it's on some kind of TV show and it's just bad entertainment. And I just hear them like going off and they're talking about sugar. And I kind of caught my attention. So I look and this is some interview with some guy who's in charge of the beverage commission or gets paid by Coke or Pepsi. I don't even know what it was about because I just walked in on it. But yeah, it turns out they play the documentary Fed Up on a loop today, and then every day that you go in there, I think they changed the documentary. And
nice.
Then they had Wheat Belly was out there, Grain Brain, the books were out. I'm like,
nice.
I'm like, I think this is going to be quite all right. So,
yeah.
I had my little appointment today was just to like establish care. I don't really need anything, but it felt really good to have validation of everything you've been doing, the last few years, and then talk to a doctor about it and have them nod their head instead of shake their head at you.
You did what? You got rid of...
Yeah, it was really cool. But I mean, like, I'm on their website now just to give you guys, like, the brief rundown. Like, these guys don't play. Like, the doctor who runs this place has his own, like, quote-unquote, like, wellness pyramid, like a food pyramid, and he trademarked it. At the very bottom, at the base, is lifestyle and diet change. At the very top is surgery. So, like, how cool is that? I mean, this guy's website goes through everything. He calls it the Preventative 10. Goes from food to how much water you should drink, how to take care of your skin, dental, sleep tips, exercise tips, weight, ideal amount of sunlight, how to manage stress, how to purify the air in your house, both mechanically and which plants to put in your house and how many per square footage. And I'm just like, oh, man, this is going to work out great. And this is all on their website, without even having to log in as a patient. It's just there. So, yeah, it was a good afternoon.
I think you just found my new doctor.
I was so happy. And
Bet
the lady's like, I know, she's like, we're kind of very woman based. All the doctors here are female. She's like, we do have a male coming in. She's like, so if you're more comfortable with that, I'm like, no, we're good. We've connected. We've met. I've seen your eyes. You've seen my eyes. We're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Like, you're my doctor. We're cool.
Did you mention that you are a world famous podcaster and share
I
this
did not.
your story?
Well, I tell you what, the one thing that was kind of funny was, obviously a lot of, they weigh you and everything. And then she's showing me her little screen and she just looks at it. She's like, well, ideally, we'd like to see our patients between, I think she said 16 and 18 for the BMI. She's like, you're at 26, so you're kind of high, but we're just not going to worry about that.
Yeah. And the fact that, for with your BMI, that just undertones just how messed up the BMI system is, because the BMI is so focused on someone that's higher on the fat side versus thick and muscular like yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that you can draw that conclusion just from taking my height and my weight and put me in an obese category. I mean, come on.
Yep. So let's talk shop a little bit. I think things have been good in the club. Any new news at this point?
Looks like we've got most of the T-shirts have been received by our gents across the country.
All but one. I have one on my desk that got returned to sender. I need to actually reach out to them and double check their address. But yeah, it seems like all but one.
Very good.
Not a bad deal. Hey, all things considered.
Yeah, not bad at all. So 40 some odd orders. And it was really awesome to see that support from so many people. Awesome to see the shirts being represented out there and all of that. So that's definitely a really cool thing. Looking forward to the next drop, whenever that is. We're working on the details. We did a survey on what people would like, and so that gave us some ideas on where we should go, and we'll start getting together on making a plan for what to do exactly there before too long. So what else is going on? Membership is still growing. Where are we at on 101? Let's look at that here real quick. That one's growing.
We're definitely in the 600 pluses for sure.
617 currently. And the Keto Men's Club, 3,500 still. That one's definitely been growing a little bit more slowly, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that's showing good, healthy, slow growth, and I think that's a good thing. So let's see. Let's go ahead and dive into our shout outs real quick. We've got lots and lots of great stories being shared by a lot of people, which is really, really cool. Alberto, let's start with you.
Mine goes out to, we just had a good interaction last night, I believe. A member in the main group, Justin Halaska. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. We had gotten on the subject of he just finally got a smart scale, something to do with the smart scale, and he actually posted a picture of the graph that shows the trend. And I had commented, like, you know what? I go, that graph is all you need. Like, never mind anything attached to it. That graph is all you need. And we went back and forth, and he said he revealed that he was thinking of me, and he took on this challenge where he's going to be running 5 miles, running or speed walking 5 miles 3 days a week for a total of like 15 miles a week. So that's more than I ever plan on running. So good for him.
Nice. Yeah. And I'll throw mine out here real quick. One of our members in the main group, and this is honestly a little less of a shout out and more of an encouragement. He posted today sharing that he and his wife have had a rough couple months. And one of those reasons is that he had surgery a couple times on his back, and then his wife gave birth to their child way early, unfortunately. And so they are still in NICU with their little one. He's growing and things are continuing to progress, it sounds like, but he's just been having a rough go at trying to stay consistent with the diet, which totally makes sense, because when you're going back and forth between hospital and trying to do work and trying to do anything and everything else, the diet is probably the last thing that I would think of. But want to encourage Brad, keep on working, keep on pushing, lean on us if he needs us. We're here, and then that little one, we're thinking and praying and hoping for the speedy uptick in his health and strength.
Yeah, we did good. Brad is my IBD buddy. We actually met that guy in the IBD support group.
Very cool. Jim, how about you?
My shout out is to Jeremy Ostrander, if I'm pronouncing his name right, hopefully so. And it's not for a transformation or anything, but a fantastic representation of steaks are greater than shakes.
Oh, yeah.
And he's out in what appears to be his backyard with a plate full of meat, pouring in one hand and pouring out the contents of a shaker bottle in the other hand.
Yep.
And dude has one of those beards that all men are jealous of anyway. And so
Yes.
the combination of all these different things just made me smile a great deal. So kudos to Jeremy on the true representation of steaks are greater than shakes in real time form.
Absolutely. He sent me a video of that, and I'm gonna get around to it. I haven't ever figured out how to make a GIF, so I'm gonna make a GIF out of his little video clip and be able to share that with people and have that be our, hey, who knows what the best steak or what the best shake is type response.
Please do so.
So that will be cool. That will be fun. Okay. Well, today we're doing another kind of question and answer podcast. We did the Everything Carnivore Cut last week, and this week we brought in one of our a return guest in this case, and we're excited to be able to get to talk with Frank again, but this time about all things proteins, mainly about how to use them, prepare them, and eat them, because that's always enjoyable. And so we've got questions from members of the group that were submitted, and we're looking forward to have the conversation. But welcome to the show, Frank. Welcome back, and good to have you.
Guys, thanks for having me back. It's good to talk to other human beings.
I bet. Always good, being that we are all kind of a little isolated in one way or another lately. So what's new with you? What's been happening?
I think the last 6 months have just been, I don't know, just kind of putting my nose down, working on new recipes. I literally turned in the manuscript for my first cookbook earlier today.
Nice.
So
Very, very nice.
It was really good time for a publisher to reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to write a book? And I'm like, well, I have nothing literally else better to do than get locked in my house for 6 months and write a cookbook.
Yep.
So I've been working on that. That's supposed to come out, I'm thinking, early 2021, and I'll have a lot more information on that later. But I literally just finally finished, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and going over it, and I turned it in today. So yeah, just been doing that a lot, from a cooking standpoint. And then, from an exercise standpoint, I've had some injuries over the last little while. Had gallstones, which never had in my life, and that took me down pretty hard. And I actually, it's kind of funny that we're talking about protein today, because I had to make some serious changes to how I ate and what I ate. And, I've been kind of navigating that while I've been doing everything else.
Yeah. Well, it's good timing then for us to have this conversation and to have you on for multiple things. I'm excited about the cookbook. That's I'm sure that it's going to be top quality stuff and really going to be something that I will definitely want on my shelf to reference whenever I'm cooking something, because my wife is the type, she's really good at just going in the kitchen and making something fabulous. I need step-by-step instructions. It doesn't work the other way for me. I have to have something a little more concrete. So I will be looking forward to that coming out early next year. So do we want to dive into the questions or any other things that you guys, Jim or Alberto, want to dig into with Frank before we get into all that?
I can keep bragging about my doctor if you want. No, we're good.
Cool. Well, Frank, let's just go ahead and start, and then we'll kind of meander through these questions here. One of the questions that we got from Mac was organ meats and how to prepare them for folks who have never had them, keeping in mind limited kitchen gadgets.
Sure. Obviously, the first one that I think everybody comes to mind and thinks of is liver. And I'll be the first one to admit I hate liver. It's it's about as good for you as a meat can get. So we'll start off with that. But it's got a very strong, kind of irony taste. And so to combat that, there's a lot of different things you can do. One thing that I like to do personally is soak it in either milk or cream. So if you're not really going to be consuming the milk, so from a carb standpoint, it's not that big a deal. You're more of using it as a marinade. But if you really want to even cut that down, you go ahead and use some heavy cream, maybe cut with water. And that's going to leach out some of that iron and that kind of irony taste. So that's one way that I try to kind of calm down the flavor of liver. Obviously, mixing it with butter and onions and bacon, that's going to be a great way to incorporate it into a dish. And then you don't have to eat ounces of liver. That's the cool thing about how nutritionally dense it is, that you don't need to eat a 12-ounce liver steak. So you can grind it or chop it up and mix it in with others. I'm pretty lucky. I've made friends with my butcher, and I implore you, if you have a butcher in your neighborhood, go find them and become pals with them. Do what you got to do, talk shop with them, because it's invaluable to have somebody who can get those cuts of meat that maybe aren't going to be on the grocery store shelf for you, just waiting. And so what I had my butcher do is I had him make me a custom grind. And so he took 10% liver, 30% heart, and 50% brisket.
Love it.
And we ground it all together, and I call it werewolf meat. And so I use that. I can make meatloafs out of it. I can make burgers out of it. I can make anything that you would use ground beef for.
Yeah.
But I've just fortified it with a ton more nutrients. So
is it very fatty?
Well, heart is incredibly lean. Liver is incredibly lean.
Yes.
Right.
Brisket is fatty. And what I do is, the cool thing is, most of the people at a grocery store or a butcher shop want the flat part of the brisket, which is the leaner part. Well, I want the point. I want that fat cap point. So he grinds that for me. So that makes up for the lean organ meats. So you end up getting a nice grind. And if they don't have brisket, you could use sirloin, chuck, stuff like that. So, work with your butcher based on what they have available. But if you can get 10% liver into your grind, you're gonna really add a lot of nutritional value to ground meat, and it's a much more palatable way to get organ meat in there. I fed it to people that would have never eaten liver, and when I told them it was, and after they hit me and why the hell did you feed me that, they got over it and they were like, that was actually pretty good. So that's liver's the big one. Heart is a really good one. It sounds intimidating because you're eating the heart of another animal, but it's lean. It's got a very beefy kind of steak type of texture. And, I treat that just like I would, like a flank steak or a skirt steak. I'll kind of like butterfly it out, cut it thin, maybe hammer it out and tenderize it. And then you can just sear it up. I actually have a recipe on my website for beef heart skewers, where I just cube them up into little, 1-inch cubes, put them on a skewer, marinate them overnight with, coconut aminos, ginger, garlic, soy, stuff like that. And grill it up, and it's delicious. So that's another way to kind of get that in there.
That beef heart's on my list of recipes to make. It just sounds super intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you touched on it. You touched on it a little bit, but organ grinds was another thing that Zane had asked about. So you have your werewolf meat. I know Danny Vega, he grinds his own and kind of combines several different cuts of meat. I think what I would probably personally do would be have them get the high fat, 27% fat ground beef, mix in liver and heart and, whatever other cheap organ meat, and maybe build on that or something like that. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Yeah. But the brisket idea totally would be awesome.
Something you could do, just if you wanted to keep it simple and do it on your own. And like you said, go out and get that 27% fat ground beef, and then buy some liver, throw it in the food processor, and then just kind of fold them and combine those two together. And so, if you're working from home and that's what you got to work with, if you do have a grinder, freeze the meat. That's very important. It really helps the meat, instead of turning to mush and smashing it. you're going to get a better grind if the meat is frozen. So,
That's
and
a
you
very
want
good
all
tip.
the working parts of the grinder to be frozen. So
Yeah.
all the working parts of it need to be cold, because hot meat just doesn't grind well.
That's a really good call out. I would have never known that. And whenever I have done, I tried to incorporate liver a little bit into my diet a little bit more. And I kind of tried to blend it. I didn't grind it too much. I used my food processor just to kind of merge it all. And it was just this mushy, like, it wasn't good. And so, yeah, I could see where having it frozen and putting it through a true grinder would definitely be better.
Yeah, even if
for
you're
sure.
using a food processor,
Mhm.
still go ahead and, doesn't have to be rock solid, but get it to where it's almost, solid frozen. And then when you hit it in the food processor, just pulse it. You don't
Yeah.
want to put it on a steady, you don't want to just hit the button and walk away.
Mhm.
You want to kind of pulse it like you would, ice cubes, and you're just kind of trying to bust it up and get it to that consistency that you want. I actually think Danny Vega puts a little bit of bacon in his
Yes, he does.
grind.
I think it's beef
So-
bacon, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't
I'm
know.
not sure.
I have the recipe too.
Either
I
way,
bet.
if you-
yeah, even better.
Yeah, any bacon that you can
Yeah,
get your
yeah,
hands
any
on,
bacon is good.
and that's going to add a smokiness to it,
Sure.
and that's another layer of flavor to kind of distract from the liver.
Yeah, and then we talked about this last week, so it's going to appear on 2 episodes in a row. But chicken hearts, extremely cheap to play with. Same thing, a little
Yes.
odd at first because it's a chicken heart, and you get them in a giant package of a pound. So there's a bunch of chicken hearts in there, and they look exactly like how they sound, little tiny hearts. They can be a little bit intimidating at first, but what I found, and this was what worked for me, because I tried cooking them in butter. I just couldn't get them down. The texture I just couldn't get past. The fact that it's a little tiny heart, it looks like a little tiny heart, freaked me out. But I would just made a simple brine, just salt and water, brine them overnight, rinse them out, wrap each heart in a half a slice of bacon and stick a toothpick through it. And then I've done them over charcoal. I've done them on the smoker. I'm sure you could do it on a skillet, but basically you cook them until the bacon is as crispy as you want it. And at that point, the brining completely changes the texture to where you almost feels like you're biting into like a really firm black olive, as opposed to something that's actually giving you quite a bit of resistance. And then at that point, it tastes more like bacon than it really does anything else. So it's much easier to palate that way. And I found that that was my training wheels into any of these organ meats. And like I said, they're cheap enough to play with and not feel bad if it just doesn't work out.
Saw a big package of them the other day whenever I was doing some grocery shopping. I really thought about it, and I'm like, I'm not sure I want to go to all the work.
Yeah,
but
smoking them is the way to go because it dries them out a little bit.
Okay.
And and it gets that bacon to shrink real tight around that heart. And then when you bite into it, it's a very unique texture. It's hard to describe, but it's not like crazy juicy to where you bite into it, it's going to gross you out.
Did you say that you're putting them on skewers, or are you?
Yeah, okay. I'll either stab a Q-tip through them, or I'll just line up a whole row of them on skewers and just throw that about 4 or 5 skewers and throw those on the smoker. And I'll do them slow and low until the bacon is where I want it, which is usually pretty crispy.
Okay. So Zach asked a question kind of parallel to this, and it was organ meats and their substitutes and the value to the health. So we've talked a little bit about the value to the health, that if you're talking about nutrient density, you are absolutely going to get the biggest bang for your buck from organs, because that's where a lot of that concentrates in all of the bodies, whether it be, chicken, beef, lamb, or whatever. And so we already know that just in general that the concentration of the really good stuff is going to be in the organs. But what about substitutes?
Well, obviously you've got muscle meat and you've got organ meat, so then I guess if organ meat's not for you, then I guess we could debate what's going to be the best and most nutrient dense muscle meat. And for me, that's probably going to be a ribeye. That's got the best marbling, that's got the best fat content. Leaner cuts like filet mignon, tenderloin, they're going to be the leanest. So they're probably going to have they're less caloric dense right off the bat, and there's going to be less fat in them. There's going to be less vitamin in it. And, so that's, I think with organ meat, you just got to kind of make your peace with it. Like, you're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. And grinding is definitely the easiest way to introduce yourself to it. Marinating things like that. So don't know if that answers the question, or if it's kind of a tough one.
Yeah.
There's not a real substitute. I mean, we could
That,
talk about
that's almost
fish
trying to
oil.
compare that. Yeah, exactly like you're saying. Like it's trying to compare that and be like, well, I don't want to eat meat, but which vegetarian version is the best tasting? You know what I mean? So
Right.
It's kind of tough.
That's like asking, what kind of tofu's best.
Yeah.
Tofu.
There's no answer.
No
for
foo.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
I will throw it out there for those who don't want to deal with the taste of liver or pancreas or whatever the things are that they're worried about. The truth is that we do have options now. You've got all sorts of different supplement companies that are out there that are creating different blends or providing pills that are desiccated liver or spleen or whatever. I have, because I was kind of low on iron in my blood tests there for a while, I took a desiccated spleen for a while so that I could try to amp up that iron intake. Now I'm just taking about a half dose, which is three capsules of beef liver every day. And that's a way that I'm getting it in along with my other basic supplementation. But I'm also doing that on a very specific reason. As I've pointed out before, I get blood work every 6 months, and that gives me feedback on, okay, I need to add a little bit of this, cut back on this. This is working. This is not. And so I'm able to create targeted supplementation pills wise that way. And, some of us, we just need to incorporate some liver, and that's probably easier to do than we think. But it's, if you want the quote unquote easy way out, that's a great way to go.
It's a good one. And you actually just jogged my memory. I see a lot of people on Instagram cutting up frozen liver into little pills almost, and just swallowing them whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been doing that.
I've never done it myself.
Yeah.
But
It
works.
It works, and it works well. It doesn't taste like anything. Because I'm aiming for a half ounce a day, which ends up being, obviously depends on the size you cut them, but roughly 15 little tiny pills. Let's just call them. It works well. Liver thaws extremely fast, and the edges tend to get a little tend to get, like, I don't want to say the edges get sharp, but if you're cutting, it cuts easier when it's frozen. So you want to cut it frozen, weigh it out. I actually started layering half ounce layers with parchment paper in between in a Tupperware, then throwing that whole Tupperware in the freezer, so I'd be able to open it up, pull my little parchment tray out with my little 15 pieces on there. And what worked best for me is pop one or two in my mouth, gently chew it just a little bit to round off the edges, and then just slam it with some water. And honestly, maybe 1 out of the 15 I'll hold in my mouth too long and I actually be able to taste it. But for the most part, it is 100% flavorless.
So question about liver, because I'm not a liver fan at all. I'm curious if liver is a meat that will hold a breading, so to speak. Like, I've done chicken before where I've kind of gone the taste Chick-fil-A, but instead of a bread crust, I've taken crushed up pork rinds and, done an egg wash and done that. Is there anything different with liver that would not make it do that?
I think it would lend itself well to that.
Are there any seasonings that would really complement it well?
Heavy seasonings.
Don't
be shy.
Bread it well.
For me, yeah, I mean, basically you're almost trying to cure it while you're breading it.
Right.
What I would do is, with beef, I always like the big four. I like salt, pepper, onion, garlic. And I think when you're dealing with beef, you can't go wrong with those seasonings. So probably what I would do is I would incorporate those into the breading. I would also incorporate those seasonings into the egg wash. And also, in this case, I would probably let that liver soak in maybe like a little bit of heavy cream or something. Instead of using an egg wash, do a little cream wash, if you will. And that should also kind of leach out a little bit of the flavor so that when you do bread, there you go. So yeah, breading it. Chicken gizzards. When Alberto was talking about hearts, I grew up eating fried gizzards, which they sound terrifying. I mean, they couldn't come up with a worse name. But there's actually another Southern dish called gizzards and gravy, where they actually pressure cook the gizzards and then serve it with like this kind of chicken part gravy that they make out of like all the bones and all that stuff. So maybe this fall when it's comfort food season, I'll work on a keto-fied version of that recipe.
Sounds interesting.
I'm sure it'll be the hit of Instagram.
Somebody that we had on the show, I forget who it was. They gave us was it Greg that provided the kind of the recipe for chicken heart soup or the chicken heart broth? And and that's just, it's, again, that was actually what I thought of when I saw the chicken hearts at the store. I'm like, I think I could. I'm not huge on soups or broths. I'm just not. But I'm like, I've got to try it sometime because it just
he did a really
intriguing.
good job of selling it too.
Yes. So yeah, that's one of those things. I've got to try it sometime. So it will be an adventure. But yeah, what you're talking about sounds interesting too, and I'd love to hear that.
One last question: soaking the liver in milk or the heavy whipping cream / water mixture. How long are we soaking for?
I would do at least 3 to 4 hours. That's something
Perfect.
you could do in the morning before you go to work or the night before even. Yeah, you can definitely do it the night before. And that's also going to help tenderize it too, which, it's kind of this cross because it is tender, but then it can be a little chewy and gristly too. So anything we can do to make the texture a little bit better and more palatable, I think is going to make it a more enjoyable experience to eat.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I think just a little bit of pre-work on that type of thing can go a long way sometimes. So that's really cool to get to hear that. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about poultry. We'll start with the first question. Why turkey isn't a real option for meat?
This sounds more like a thesis report that is, like going back to the history of time.
Yeah. So what's your feelings on that, Frank?
I like turkey. I don't know what turkey did to anybody else.
Yeah.
And, kind of going back to me, I have had this with the gallbladder. I've actually had to, this is going to sound sacrilegious, I've had to cut back drastically on the amount of fat that I've been able to eat. And I took it almost down to 0, to the point where I was eating 0 fat a day. Because if I went over 10 to 15 grams in one sitting, I would have these horrific abdominal pain. And what we did was I just changed my diet. I gave my body a break. I did take a medication to maybe help, get rid of the gallstones. And then I kind of slowly, these last couple months, started reintroducing fat. And I'm up to about 25 grams of fat per meal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm good with that. But I had to take about 2-3 months off and just eat turkey breast. Canadian bacon was the only thing. I even had to buy turkey bacon, which that's sacrilege. That was a new low for me.
Yeah, that's sacrilege right there.
People ask what hitting rock bottom is like. Turkey bacon.
Like turkey bacon. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's great.
So I totally understand that. Now, on a side note, are you doing ox bile or anything like that to help with all that?
Yes. So
I figured as much. I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I'm doing the Lipo Gold, which is a blend of some weird stuff. I'll give a shout out to Christina from Castaway Kitchen. Mm-hmm. She's been a big help. She's been awesome. I've known her for a couple of years. She doesn't live too far away from me. Well, actually, she's down in Florida now, but when she was in Virginia, just up the road in Maryland. So I've worked with her on a few things, but I called her up because she's a nutritional practitioner. And she is a wealth of knowledge. So if you're having anything weird and you need to maybe get some good advice, check out her website, thecastawaykitchen.com. But I talked to her and she recommended me try a few things. And so I kind of incorporated a lot of stuff. Yeah, the ox bile. Yeah, they really need to come up with better names for this stuff.
Yeah. None of it sounds appetizing, but it's great for you.
No, we're swallowing frozen liver and eating ox bile. Don't tell us we don't know how to party.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And living down here in Texas, I don't know, man. You go to a barbecue joint and you get some barbecue smoked turkey, and there's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a huge
fan
of turkey.
It's the best.
But yeah, properly brined and smoked turkey breast is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
The key that everybody, I think, especially in Central Texas down there, that they do is they take the skin off the turkey breast. And at first you're like, oh man, but the skin's so good. But the problem with long smokes and skin is it absorbs all the bitterness of the wood,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just unpleasant. The skin gets rubbery. It's just over smoked, and it doesn't have a good flavor. So when they do it, they do a real simple, salt and pepper, post oak, low and slow smoke, and the turkey breast at any of those restaurants down there is the hidden gem of any good barbecue restaurant.
Yeah, it's not Turkey, but in Lexington, where my wife is originally from, and here in Texas, there's a very small, only open on Saturday barbecue place called Snow's Barbecue. And yes, and she Tootsie, who is the head chef, so to speak, she mid-80s, almost 90 type age, and she's out there doing her thing every Saturday. But I've had it myself. Her smoked chicken is some of the best smoked chicken, or just chicken in general, that I've ever had. And that's me having it when it's kind of been cold and sitting on a counter, probably waiting for me for an hour or two whenever we get out there late. It's still that good. So it can be really good stuff when you do it right, for sure.
There's actually a Netflix Chef's Table barbecue edition that she's going to be featured in.
Yes.
I believe it comes out in a week or two.
It would surprise me. So yeah, by the time this airs, that should be out there. And yeah, Snow's Barbecue in Lexington, Texas is absolutely one of the best barbecue places in the state, for sure. So let's further talk about poultry. Someone specifically asked about duck, wild duck, or goose.
Well, I can tell you, duck I love. It's got a huge, depending on what type of preparation you're doing. If you're going to cook a whole duck, the key to a whole duck is a ton of fat, way more fat than any chicken or anything like that. So you really got to dry out that skin. A lot of times what they'll do when they make Peking duck at Asian restaurants, what they actually do is they have compressed air, and they'll actually take the whole duck and shoot compressed air between the skin and the body to separate it, so that when the skin cooks, it actually gets very crispy. So I'm not recommending you take a duck out to your, mechanic shop and, shoot it with the air gun. But just to give you an idea, that is kind of a method that's used a lot. So if I'm going to cook a whole duck, I'm pulling that duck out and patting it dry and rubbing it down with salt 2 days before I even cook it. And, that's the key.
A dry brine for a couple days ahead of time then.
Yep, dry brine. And then for me, I like to go low and slow with the duck and really render out as much of that fat as possible. And then at the very end, I'm going to crank up the heat and crisp it up. And I don't have something actually I have on my list was to get some duck recipes done. And I've got a whole duck in my freezer, and I've got a couple duck breasts, but I actually haven't had a chance to cook them up. Duck breast is probably the easiest way to incorporate some duck. It's got a real thick layer of fat on the breast, on the top of the breast. And what you want to do is just score that, give it a good seasoning of salt, and you want a really hot pan, and you want it dry. You don't want to add oil to it because there's so much fat in the skin. You put the duck in, and what you'll actually do is start it in a cold pan and then turn it on hot. So by the time it raises up and is actually hot, it's already rendered enough fat to cook itself in.
Cool.
So you'll cook it for, let's say 7 to 8, 9 minutes on one side on that skin. And don't touch it. Don't move it. So you're going to actually cook it about 70% of the way on that fat side. And then you're going to finish it off by flipping it over.
Very cool. That's very similar to Carrie Brown's tactic for pork chops. She said start with a stone cold pan.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I do with bacon too. I start baking off cold for that reason, because then by the time the thing warms up, then you're cooking it in its own grease, and you don't get that. You throw it down there hot, it just sticks to it, and nobody likes ruined bacon.
No, that's a sad day.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, as far as goose goes, goose is a lot different. I'll be honest with you. I've got a friend who's a big hunter, and he gets a lot of goose, and he processes it, and he does a lot of stuff with it. But it's a much more strong flavor than duck or any of the other game fowl. So, and it's greasier. It's almost all dark meat. So it's definitely, it's good for stews. It's good for soups, because you can kind of incorporate it with other things. But yeah, I'll be honest, wild goose is not my favorite thing. I'm definitely more on the duck side.
Yeah. That's interesting that goose would be almost entirely dark meat. That I'm not sure I would have assumed such things, but it's good to know because
They're
that
evil
will,
creatures.
Yeah, they are. They're flying rats.
So along the same lines as well, talking about David Blako, our good friend, he asked about grilling poultry bone-in versus boneless.
I think that comes down to just being a personal preference. If you're cooking bone-in, it's going to take longer, so that you've got that to think about right off the bat. For me, it's all about what the preparation is going to be. If you're looking to just eat some quick chicken thighs and you just want to throw them in a pan or throw them on the grill and be done with it, boneless, skinless is really easy. If you like that bone and having that skin, then that's fine, but you're going to have to treat it a little bit differently. Again, you want to render the fat out of the skin. One thing about dark meat versus white meat, especially with chicken and turkey, white meat I always cook to about 165 degrees, but dark meat like thighs and wings I always cook to about 175 to 180. And I think that's a common mistake, that people don't cook their dark meat long enough. And it's not a health thing. It's that the dark meat takes longer to break down the collagens and separate from the bone. So if you've ever eaten a piece of dark meat where it's kind of like good on the outside, but then when you take the bite closest to the bone, it's almost chewy and tastes underdone, that's what that is. And it's not bad. It's not like they undercooked it, but from an optimal palate perspective, you want to cook that to about 185, somewhere in that 180 range.
Who was it that we heard that the best way to know that chicken leg is done is when the skin starts creeping up the bone?
We were talking about chicken thighs. That was very recently. And I remember the conversation, but I'm not even going to try to guess who it was because I'll probably get it wrong.
Yeah, it was.
Wasn't it Tony?
It might have been.
The most recent Tony we had on?
Yeah, maybe.
Keto Collide? I think that's who it was.
Yeah, that was a good tip. That was one that I will definitely remember and use. And I think that goes right along with what you're saying, Frank, is at that point when the skin and everything starts to creep up the bone, you've got that, thorough cook all the way through. There's some separation there and all of that.
Well, it's almost like ribs. If you think about, when the ribs kind of creep up on the bone, you're getting close as well with, pork and beef.
Yeah.
So Frank, if you're cooking, whether it be chicken, bone-in chicken, or whatever the case may be, we've talked about bone broth and things like that. Are there better ways of cooking with the bone in that makes using the bone for bone broth later a good thing? Like you see, is there a step-by-step that people should follow to maximize the bone broth if that's something you want to do?
Well, I think that if you're going to do it, really, again, it all comes down to what your final goal is. If you just want to, if you're just trying to eat dinner that night and you're not thinking about like using every part of the animal and all that stuff, then just buy the cut you intend to eat. But if, let's say, you did have bone-in chicken thighs, but you didn't want the bone, you could cut them, remove the bone and put it in a freezer bag and make bone broth at a later date. Anytime you make any kind of bone broth, in my personal opinion, and most restaurants you'll find, roasting the bones is key before you put it in a liquid. So you're going to bring out all of that flavor. You're going to roast it, maybe get some aromatic vegetables like celery and onion and garlic and throw that in a pan. And you can really roast the hell out of them. I mean, you can do about an hour at 425 to 450 degrees until those bones are just before they're charred. You want them nice and golden, and then you would transfer all those bones and cartilage and all that good stuff into a big pot of water and then just put it on low and forget about it. And the difference in the flavor of, a broth that you just took raw bones and threw them in a pot of water versus taking that extra time to roast the bones is massive. And that's the difference between a good soup and a great soup. Because the broth is obviously the foundation of any good soup. So, or if, you're even just drinking it, as a bone broth, you really want to go ahead and roast those bones ahead of time. And that goes with, a whole bird. If you're buying a whole chicken, and honestly, for like home use, I know Rob Wolf does this. Even if he's eating like pork chops and ribs and a whole chicken, at the end of the meal, he'll take all of those bones and whatever carcass is left over, and he'll freeze it all together. So you can mix bones. If you're going to make a broth later, it doesn't all have to be beef. It doesn't all have to be pork. It doesn't have to all be chicken. You can kind of just get what you get and save it up until you have enough bones to go ahead and make a broth.
So real quick, because I know Berto's got a question, but I want to ask. So when you go to your butcher, what do you find are the best bones to ask for to make bone broth?
Shank bones are always the best. And they actually sometimes call them soup bones, because that's going to have that good marrow. The femur bone of any cow is, if you ever see like bone marrow served at a restaurant, that's always coming off like that femur bone. And they'll either just slice them into like 1-2 inch, discs, or they'll just split it straight down the middle vertically. And then, you can roast it, and that stuff's delicious. That's nature's butter.
A real quick question on chicken, only because I don't cook it often, so it still kind of freaks me out sometimes. And I mean, you get to see almost everything I cook before most other people do, because every time I cook something that comes out good, first pictures go straight to Frank almost every single time. But that day I was making those, the chicken quarters with the Alabama white sauce. I think I know what I did, but I want to make sure, I want to get your opinion on it and see what was wrong. Everything, I shouldn't say wrong, but what came out a little odd. Everything temped out fine. Stacked the probe in there, was making sure everything cooked good. But when we cut one of the thighs open, it was extremely red down by the bone.
Do you remember what temperature you cooked it to?
Not off the top of my head.
See, I'm thinking you probably cooked it to 160, 165, which is done, but you're still against that bone going to have some meat that still, and sometimes on especially dark meat, you do have those little kind of blood pockets, we'll call them, that if you cook it to 180, those will break down, but at 160, they're still going to be there. And it definitely freaks you out. It doesn't look appetizing. Sometimes you see it on wings that haven't been cooked long enough. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're undercooked. It just means that they're not optimally cooked.
That probably was it then.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good to know. Because I mean, what I had assumed had happened was as I was probing it, I thought maybe I just jabbed that probe straight to the bone and got into like the marrow, and it only happened on one piece, and I'm like, and unfortunately, it was the piece that my 9-year-old daughter.
Ooh, yeah. One thing I will say is, whenever you're cooking any kind of meat, always probe the biggest one. You know what I mean? So find if you got 6 pieces of chicken, find the biggest, thickest one and probe that, because if that one's done, the rest are done.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And next question, and I'm going to read this one because it's kind of an inside joke from another group we're in, and it's going to go quickly. But our good friend Johan, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. Vrolix? I don't know. I love that guy's name. It just sounds awesome. He said, steak or chicken when cutting, and then fish versus poultry versus ruminants. And the joke behind the steak versus chicken when cutting is we're also in a different group together that's all about fitness. And Johan's a freaking animal. And someone had made the blanket statement that you can't eat beef when you're trying to cut weight because it's not going to work because it's too fatty and there's no way it's going to work. And so, him being keto and him knowing me, he immediately tagged me in that post, and then we had a grand old time with it. But that was the whole steak versus chicken thing. Obviously, when it comes to, if you're cutting weight, it's whatever you feel like eating in proper amounts. People tend to lean towards chicken because you can get more of it as far as volume goes. But for me personally, the downside of that is chicken for me is extremely unsatisfying. Like if we're going the straight low calorie, low fat, strictly for protein, you're going boneless, skinless chicken breast. I can eat it, but I get sick of eating it rather quickly, and then I'm hungry again very quickly. Whereas steak, I'll probably have to eat less volume because it's more nutrient dense, more calories, but it leaves me satisfied a lot longer. And then go ahead.
It's funny you bring that up because that was something I was listening to a podcast. Spencer Nadolsky, I don't know if you've come across him. He's one of those guys that doesn't necessarily do the keto. He doesn't necessarily do he's got something to say about everything. But, something he was talking about was finding that satiety balance. you can eat a whole stick of butter, and man, that's gonna fill you up, and it's a ton of calories. It's almost just fat for the sake of fat. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have chicken breast, which is just all protein and no fat. And like you said, it doesn't keep you satisfied. But if you find that balance where it's got X amount of protein and X amount of fat, and it's good for you, it keeps you filled up longer, and it meets your caloric needs, I think that's the winning combination, no matter what type of food it is. If you're eating a leaner cut like a pork chop instead of like a pork shoulder, you may want to add a piece of butter to it, or you might want to dip it in mayonnaise, or whatever it is. So finding that balance of that protein to fat that's going to keep you full the longest, I think, is what's key.
Yeah, and speaking from very recent personal experience, when you're purposely cutting calories hard, and it starts to get a little painful, and I mean anything that'll give you a little mental break and anything that you're going to enjoy, I would suggest go for that. Like, yeah, I could have swapped out all my beef for chicken when I was cutting and eating a lot more, but I would have been miserable, and that would not have been fun. Whereas people thought I was lying when I said during this most recent cut, my entire day was based around starting off with a pound of ground beef. And a pound of ground beef took care of about 1,100 of my calories, which is just over half of my calories. And then from after that pound of ground beef, that was calculated for every single day. Then around that, I would fill in with maybe a little bit of chicken, maybe some tuna, pork chops, pork sirloins, steaks, whatever. But it was all based around eating a pound of ground beef a day. And I found that I want to say very satisfying. It was as satisfying as it was going to get when you are quite literally starving yourself for the sake of vanity.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. So you could have had a protein shake. You could have had one of those like kind of fat bomb, protein shakes. In my experience, even the ones that are high caloric, they don't fill me up. They just kind of like, I drink a protein shake and I'm like, what was the point of that? And I'd much rather eat food than drink a shake. And there's people that think the exact opposite.
Yeah, and I don't understand because the average protein shake, you're still going to have some calories. Like the one I take on occasion, I think is still 100 calories. There's still calories in it. Mind you, 100 is not much, but in my opinion, I'm not any more satisfied than if I were to drink twice that volume in water. I mean, you're getting a little protein in there, sure, but the drinking your calories was great for bulking, because for that exact reason, you could pound a ton of calories and not fill up. The same goes for like bulletproof coffees and that kind of thing. My bulletproof coffee was 500 calories, and I could drink one of that and eat breakfast, which is great when that's the goal. But I definitely did not recommend that with the cut. The only thing I was doing with the cut was because I was so drastically low, which was I was not eating for performance. So let's get that right off the bat. There's a difference between eating for performance. There's a difference between eating for a look, what bodybuilders do. And I was kind of going the bodybuilder approach. Now, I was drinking one protein shake mixed with coffee in the morning right before I went to the gym, because I was just kind of so depleted calorically that I needed to have something in me to kind of burn off as I worked out. Because otherwise, I don't know if I would have had the energy. My workouts would have been absolutely miserable. And it's not like I invented the wheel on this. I talked to a bunch of people and they all agreed, like, when you're this much of a caloric deficit, it's in your best interest to get a whey protein shake in you, at least maybe a little bit of fat. Because, it's going to digest quickly. It's not going to have you feeling full. And you're going to be able to at least get in there and have a little something extra to push you through your workout, because they're going to get extremely difficult. And they did get extremely difficult.
I can imagine.
We kind of, so that did kind of speak to one of the questions, which was protein powders versus other things. And I that's been my experience as well. I'll be honest, I can eat a keto brick. It's full of great nutrition, good fat, good protein. I don't always feel full afterwards. And that's something technically solid. And so I think there is something very specific that triggers our satiety response in our body to eating real food versus a protein powder or a meal replacement of some sort and all of that. And I think it goes without saying, we are definitely pro real food, steaks over shakes and everything else. But, if you do have to supplement with something, like Berto said that during his cut, he actually did supplement with just a little bit, one scoop of protein powder at the beginning of the day as his pre-workout. if you're going to do that, make sure that you're getting a very high quality whey protein isolate is what we would normally say, because that's going to get the least amount of insulin response. So if you're wanting to limit a glucose response, that's the way to go, and make sure that it's good and high quality versus one of the Joe Blow protein brands that are out
and
there.
like the go-to standard that is available almost anywhere would be Dymatize ISO 100. But the one I bought was actually sweetened with stevia, and it was vanilla. So I mean, it's kind of a very neutral flavor that can go in any direction. And actually, once I got my tooth yanked and I was kind of stuck on the softer foods the first couple of days, I was actually mixing a scoop with a half a cup of yogurt, a Bulgarian yogurt, for the probiotics, because the antibiotics were tearing me up inside. So that was kind of like my go-to soft food. Just throw a quick scoop in there, and then I'd at least be able to get something in me that wasn't gonna have any chance of irritating the gaping wound in my mouth.
Yeah.
No, mixing the protein powders with yogurt is actually a good move, and I've done that as a quick dessert from time to time. Doing like a scoop of protein powder and maybe a scoop of peanut butter powder, and putting that into a Greek yogurt, and that at least I can kind of take my time to eat that. I feel like shakes, I just chug them down, but at least with a yogurt, you're going one spoonful at a time, and if you're not eating like a jackass, you can kind of make it last a while.
Yeah, it works. It works good, And like you said, it's always going to be steaks over shakes.
Mm-hmm.
And like as I stated, if you were to take my caloric and protein intake for the day, and then calculate what percentage actually came out of a tub, it is extremely small over the course of a week, let alone a month.
Okay, two more questions from the crowd, and one of them we could make an entire episode on, so we'll probably hit that last and somewhat quickly for now. But Jim, our very own Jim, asks, when shopping for a ground beef, do you go with 80-20, 90-10? What if it's part of a recipe instead of just making burgers? How does that fat percentage play a role?
I have mixed feelings on this. It's something that I think when I first started keto, I always bought the fattiest ground beef I could get. And it's normally cheaper. I think it's the 73-27. And that's normally like the Econo tube that you can get at Walmart. And 80-20 is kind of the happy medium, I think. It's great in just about any single recipe. If you're going to make a meatloaf, if you're going to make any use that you have for ground beef, 80-20 I think is the sweet spot. For me, when I was having the gallbladder issues, I had to go to a 96% lean ground beef, and I could still only have about 4 ounces at a serving. So that's a great option if you're really maybe during a cut and you've upped your protein and lowered your fat for a time period. The cool thing about the 95% lean is you don't need to drain off any fat. And the only issue with using the really fatty ground beef is that sometimes it does make your recipes greasy. I have a shepherd's pie recipe where I top it with mashed cauliflower instead of mashed potatoes. It's really good. But man, if I don't use like an 85% lean ground beef, it's soup, and it's grease soup. And I would rather have lean ground beef and add a pat of grass-fed butter to it and control A, the quality of the grass-fed butter, and B, the amount of fat that I have, than just drinking, ground beef fat soup.
Sure.
So if you're going to make a burger, the other thing you have to think about is the shrinkage. The fattier cuts are going to shrink up a lot when you cook them. So if you're forming a patty, know that you're going to lose a lot of that fat on the skillet. So for me, I always recommend 80-20 as a general rule. And then if you're trying to go cheap, definitely in some aspects, the very fatty 73% is good. And for certain recipes, I do prefer using the 95% lean stuff.
Yeah. Very cool. Now, I'll throw this in because this was a suggestion that my wife, again, the rock star in the kitchen that she is, she was seeing my putting 5 pounds of ground beef in the pan and browning it all up. Only it was just mainly just stewing it all up. It wasn't actually browning. Yeah. And it was very mushy. It had very little texture. So this last time that I took my 5-pound tube, she suggested that I break it up and I put it on sheets or on sheet pans and actually bake it in kind of crumbles instead of putting it in. And that was like night and day. The crumbles got brown. It had some texture, had some bite to it. It still had all the fat in there, even though it was the high fat. It was a 73% fat or 73% protein, 27 fat type ground beef. And that it still had plenty of flavor on it. And I even forgot to season it before I put it in the oven. So I just seasoned it after, and it was fine because it had so much of that fat in there. But it needed that different technique to really get some good texture, because otherwise it was okay, but it was easy for me to get very bored of that texture. So that's my tip to throw in with that, regardless of the percentage, wanting some texture to ground beef, and you're not going to be using it for patties, then just crumble it onto a sheet pan and then bake it at a relatively high heat for a decent amount of time until it browns up real good. And that seemed to work pretty well for me.
Yeah, that's
Sounds like a plan to me.
sound advice. Yeah. Well, the only thing I'll add is, and I mean, I buy a steer at a time, so like my beef comes in one variety, and what I can gather is 85%. Just gauging by looks, because there's really no way to know. But the only thing I've looked into that might make a difference, if you're specifically making smash burgers and you want that really lacy, crispy edge, I think in that scenario, the fattier the beef, the better results you're going to get.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, the last question that we'll throw out here and give you the chance to give a quick answer to. There is a quick answer on this one.
This will be the second half of the episode.
Is smoking 101, please. I can't wait to have a house where he can smoke meats. And so, yeah, you do a lot of smoking. I'm sure Berto will have plenty to throw in, but again, we may just have to have you on another time to really dive 100% into this topic. But what's the quick version of what you would say for what you need to know when talking about smoking meats?
Let me hop in here real quick and tell me if I'm wrong, because this guy doesn't.
Please.
As he was saying, he's looking to get into his house so he can start. I think it's fair to assume. Now, mind you, what I'm referring to is not going to be smoking, but the heat source doesn't really matter. Anything we say in regards to smoking, you can do in the oven as far as getting it cooked. Now, it's not going to be smoked, obviously, but the method is pretty much the same. You're just going to have a much different outcome. But like, you could almost technically practice in the oven, and then when you get a smoker, perfect it on the smoker, just for the sake of gauging time and how long it's going to take to cook these giant slabs of protein, if that's the route you're going.
Sure. I worked at a restaurant that did not have a smoker, and we did our pork shoulders in the oven. And people would tell me all the time how good it was. And we dry rubbed the pork just like we would if we were going to smoke it. And what we ended up doing was we ended up rubbing it down with liquid smoke. And that liquid smoke is kind of a cheat way to impart some smoky flavor if you don't have a smoker. So to answer the smoking 101 question and not have you guys up until 3 a.m, I will try to make my answer as concise as possible. Smoking can be as simple as buying a Weber kettle for $100 and lighting the charcoal on one side and cooking with indirect heat. So you light all of your charcoal or wood or whatever it is on one side, and you put your meat on the other side. And you play with the fire and you work with your temperatures. Smoking meat is playing with fire. That's, the very simplistic, thing. A good pitmaster can control the heat. Now, we have modern things like pellet smokers where they take that away and they just simplify it. The pellet smoker takes care of that for you, and all you have to do is, not overcook it and season it the way you want. And I'll be honest, I like sleeping at night, so I use a pellet smoker religiously. Do I have the capability of using what they call a stick burner or an offset cooker? Sure, I did it for years and years. And every time I wanted a brisket, that meant I had to stay up for 18 hours. And so I never ate brisket, which is a sad way to live a life. So my compromise was getting a pellet grill. And you can get a pellet grill for, as cheap as, I like to say that $500 is about as
Yeah.
low as I like to go.
I agree with that.
I
And unless you want to
recommend
get into the baby pellet grills like the GMG Davy Crockett, which is, quite literally a portable, tiny little pellet grill. You can find those for $300, which will work, but
that's
you will
a tailgater
quickly,
to me.
yeah, you will
Yeah.
quickly realize shortly after buying it that you want a bigger one.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any friends at all, you're going to want to have something a little bit bigger than that because, you know, they just, you'll outgrow it and then you'll end up buying another one and then you'll be like, well, why did I buy this in the first place? And then you try to sell it on, you know, Craigslist or whatever, and you end up getting $100 for it. So it's an investment, and you got to decide, you know, maybe getting that Weber kettle and kind of learning on that for $100 is the way to go. People like those ceramic cookers, like the Green Egg. I'm personally not a fan. I think they're better for grilling than they are for smoking. But yeah, you can, there's so many routes you can go. There's the purists that, you know, like in, you know, you guys know in Texas, you guys don't do a lot with the rubs. It's all about the wood and the thyme. And basically salt and pepper is the majority of the seasoning. But then you get into the Carolinas where it gets pretty inventive with the amount of spices they'll put on a pork shoulder. And then, you know, you can get into sauces all day long. And obviously, you know, most barbecue sauces are 90% high fructose corn syrup. But, you know, there are things that you can work with. There's actually a couple of really decent sugar-free barbecue sauces out right now. You've got Alterna Sweets, Kinder's makes a good one, and Sweet Baby Ray actually just came out with a sugar-free that is not half bad. So, gosh, so barbecue 101, and I'll try to put the one more minute of speaking. Find something that you can smoke with, even a grill. If you have a grill, a gas grill, turn one side of it on, take a bunch of wood chips, put it inside of a pack of foil and fold it up, and then poke a bunch of holes in it. Put that foil over the fire and then cook your meat on the burners that you have not turned on. And that may be the way that you introduce yourself to smoking. So it can be that simple. And then as you develop a love for it and you discover that you're doing it every weekend, then it's time to go make that investment. And, you know, God, I've spent thousands of dollars on smokers. It's, you know, I think back of all the money that I'd have in my bank account if it weren't for guitars and smokers. And that seems to be, and camera equipment now. I just keep finding really expensive habits to get into. But yeah, you know, it's fun. There's not much better than a bunch of guys hanging around a smoker cooking a brisket overnight. You know, some of the best times I've had in my life are hanging out at barbecue competitions and stuff like that. So it's definitely more than just cooking dinner.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's to actually learn how to manage a fire and control a specific temperature on a cooker. It takes a while. It's an art form. That's the lady from Snow's Barbecue that we were talking about. That lady has been doing that since she was probably 8 years old, and she's 80 now.
Yeah.
And I believe in the preview of the video, she actually just puts her hand over the fire and she knows if it's right.
Yep.
She doesn't have a thermometer in her pocket.
Nope.
She doesn't have a gauge on the end of the cooker. She puts her hand over the flame and she goes, that feels like 275. And, you know, like I said, that is an art form. But yeah, I would love to come back on the show and have an all barbecue episode, and we can make it a 7-hour Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that there's lots of options out there for smokers, kind of like what you said. But one that gets overlooked, that was what my wife and I ended up doing. My wife, she actually worked at Cookie or at his restaurant whenever she had a day-to-day operation at one point, and then she also kind of ended up the pitmaster at a youth camp for a while, and ended up learning how to do it on the big rig. And so the small little smoker that she had just wasn't cutting it. We ended up we bought a kit and we made a 55-gallon drum
UDS.
smoker. And so we that's what we ended up making. And now it's quite a process to get it sandblasted to make sure that it didn't have any residue from the food grade liner thing left in it. And we had to prep it and actually build it. But we're DIYers anyway. So if you don't want to spend a small fortune on something pre-made, you can spend a slightly smaller fortune on the kit and on the drums and everything else like that. We actually have a spare drum at my mother-in-law's house that if this one decides that it's starting to rust out or whatnot, we have that other one in reserve. We can get it sandblasted and make it. So yeah.
And David Blako, I think, built one. I think he was only like $75 in or something like that. And I'm just scrolling right now. There's no shortage of videos on how to make them. You could buy them finished for. I think if you wanted to part with like $250, you could probably find one that's done. There's no shortage of them out there. I mean, right now I'm staring at one that it's $954, and then you go on YouTube and they're building them for $75-$80. So it just depends on where you want to go. From what I understand, the beauty of those is since you're cooking vertically, they are a lot more efficient.
Yep.
They use a lot less fuel and they stay hot for a very long time.
Yes, they do. My wife will put in fuel at the beginning of a smoke. 12 hours later, there's still fuel.
Sure. No, they're definitely economical as far as fuel. There's no doubt about that. The key that I've found with those and the ones that you make yourself, make sure that there's a lot of aerodynamics that go into any pit, and if your airflow is not good, it can, you can either burn really high heat and you can't a good control of the smoker, or it just stalls out low. So I think Hunsucker is a company out of Texas that makes a Vortex drum, and they're not cheap. I think they're like $800-900. But yeah, there's a lot of guys at the barbecue competitions that smoke their briskets on those drums, and they power cook. So they'll cook it like 325 or 350, and they can knock out a brisket in about 6-7 hours, and that's impressive. So there's endless ways to smoke meat.
And one of the more popular ones, I just hopped on their website right now, is the actual Pit Barrel Cooker, a veteran-owned company.
Yep.
They sell these things in a box, ready to rock. They make a junior for $250, and they make the original for $350, and that's just going right off pitbarrelcooker.com.
Yep. They do a good job.
Yep. Lots and lots of options. So, that there's a lot of work that can go into implementing any of that, but that is just kind of the nature of what it is. And yep, exactly.
I got to say one thing, because I'm in a ton of barbecue groups and I get this question every time I post a picture of meat. Someone will just write time and temperature, question mark. And it's kind of like the person who writes, recipe question mark. Time and temperature, there's so many variables that go into that. How big was the piece of meat? A 6-pound brisket is going to take a lot less time to cook than a 15-pound brisket, and then you take the temperature that it was outside. When you guys are down in Texas and it's 100 degrees, things are going to cook better. The moisture, the humidity in the air is better than when I'm smoking a brisket in January in Maryland. So there's so many things. Smoked meat is done when it's tender. You get a thermometer and you probe it for the temperature, but more than that, you're probing it to feel the tenderness. And when that thermometer just plunges into the meat and feels like butter and it's not fighting, you got a tender piece of meat. So learn to cook with feel more than a recipe book, when it comes to barbecue. And that's another part of the art form, is knowing when the meat's perfect. So I will leave it with that.
Yeah. I really do think that we could absolutely spend an entire episode just on that, and we've taken enough of your time and it's getting late, so we'll cut it off about there, but definitely more to be discussed at a later date. We can go into all sorts of logistics, and maybe we'll ask questions for anything specific that people would have questions about. But yeah, you covered a lot of the basics. There's, best as I understand it, again, my wife takes care of most of that just because she has experience of cooking for a few hundred people at a time. She takes care of most things in the kitchen anyway. That being said, any other business to attend to before we get social information from Frank and how people can connect with him and all that?
I'm hungry again.
Well, Frank, how can people find you online, connect with you, ask questions, all of that?
Let's see. I've got 2 websites. CulinaryLion.com is all keto recipes, and that's so you can find me on all the platforms. I spend most of my time on Instagram and Facebook, so Culinary Lion is the handle. But I also run a barbecue grilling page that it started out years ago, and it wasn't all keto, but it's kind of morphed into a lot of the recipes being keto friendly. So it's definitely worth checking out. And that's Grilling 24/7, and that's grilling24x7.com. And again, I'm on all the social media platforms with those. So between those two websites, there's a lot of grilling resources, a lot of smoking, barbecue. I just posted a really good article on smoking brisket. I've been getting a ton of questions over the time. So I actually broke down everything from should you use foil to butcher paper to, should you inject, what kind of smokers. So I wrote up a big article on that. And if anybody has a lot of questions on brisket, that would be a great place to start. And that is at grilling247.com.
Yep, I think that people will find a wealth of information there. And I think we've gotten that tonight as well. So thank you for being on. A reminder to our listeners, you can find all of our links to Facebook groups and the podcast itself and the Facebook page and our individual socials. You can get that at our website, theketomansclub.com. And so you have great ways of connecting with us there. You also have our email, ketomansclubpodcast@gmail.com. You can also give us a call, leave a voicemail at 512-518-6161. We'd ask you to do one thing. And if you found value in today's episode, whether it be just a tidbit of food information or that you think that some of the information that you heard tonight is going to help someone else think that maybe keto is achievable, whatever that situation may be, share this episode with someone else. Male, female, we don't care who our listeners are. We want these stories to encourage and inspire people to be able to implant change in their life. And I think I use this analogy pretty much every week now, but I think it's totally true that we want to be a part of, the pebble that starts the avalanche for someone in their health journey and helping them find healing and health and being the best version of themselves that they can be. So that's that. Any parting shots, Jim, Alberto?
Just thanks to Frank. Thank you for all the advice. I do hit you up at very odd hours, and you seem to get back to me in reasonable amounts of time. I think it was just Sunday. I had an arm roast thought out, and I'm like, man, I should hit Frank up to see what he thinks about this arm roast. I'm like, you know what? Before I bother him, how about I just check his website? Lo and behold, right there, it was a delicious recipe for an arm roast that I took advantage of. Cooked it up, knocked it out, and it came out fantastic. As every recipe that I've ever done of yours, they always do. They always come out great. You can't go wrong, man.
Man, I appreciate it. And like I said, hit me up. Anybody out there, if you guys have questions about cooking something, I do think that no trouble.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I don't ever mind if I can help somebody out with a cooking question. Go ahead and reach out. I don't mind at all.
I do want to give you a book title suggestion, which may be the title of this episode also, just as an FYI. I really like Hot Meat Doesn't Grind Well. So I think if you could put that on the front of a book and just
mid-water sip.
Please just on, like page 487 or something that Jim, Chris, and Alberto gave me the idea and I love them forever. Just a little shout out someplace in the book. We'll be totally fine with that.
Hot meat doesn't grind well. I mean, are there ever truer words to live by?
Oh, Lord. Well, I think tonight's been very informative, and I really do think that there's going to be a lot of great meals that end up coming out of this conversation for our listeners, and I hope that's the case. Until next week, make sure to eat meat, lift heavy, sleep, and repeat. Thank you for joining us for the Keto Man's Club podcast. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Would you help us spread the word about the Keto Man's Club by sharing with your friends and family? We're available on all podcast platforms, so just search for Keto Man's Club and you'll find us. If you would like to connect with us, you can do so a number of ways. Our web address leads to our Facebook group, theketomansclub.com. That's TheKetomansClub.com.
KetoMansClub.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Keto Man's Club Podcast. Lastly, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out via email to KetoMansClubPodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to hanging out with you again next week.